So welcome back, guys, to another Lazy Sunday lore. I'm Smotown, and if you're new to this series, it's essentially a casual playthrough series where I talk about lore, play, and die at the same time. Now, we haven't gone much further from last time. I'm now going to move towards the Cathedral of the Deep, while I talk about today's subject, which is going to be essentially the Way of White, and the evolution and the preservation of the ways of the old royalty throughout the three games. I'm enjoying kind of looking at the trilogy-wide lore at the moment. And so, when it comes to the Way of White, we're first introduced to them in Dark Souls 1, in the Way of Petrus, who's the first character that we come across, who, despite being a duplicitous character, does in fact represent them as a cleric of the Way of White. And we get another couple of different characters that we meet, including Rhea of Thurland and her bodyguards. Now, Rhea and Petrus both seem to be of Thurland. So, oh my goodness, these things. Don't worry, I have got my torch ready so I can get rid of these maggots. So yeah, there we go, the classic Lazy Sunday lore playstyle there, of not doing it well at all. So yeah, we learn of another couple of characters such as Rhea of Thurland. And we therefore kind of see that Thurland, firstly, is one of the main kind of pro-God, pro-Way of White cities. We kind of almost see it like the Vatican City at this point, which does change by the time of Dark Souls 3, as that role kind of gets taken on by Karim. So at this point we kind of see a lot of clerics coming from Thurland, and we essentially learn that the Way of White is a kind of religion that venerates the old gods, at that point not the old gods, the ways of Gwyn and his family, and preserve their kind of way of life in the Age of Light, and agree with that side of things. It's headed by Gwyn, but the actual religion seems to be handled by his uncle, known as Allfather Lloyd. We learn from the White Seance Ring in Dark Souls 1 that he's the head of the church, and of course the uncle to Lord Gwyn. Now, when you first play through your first playthrough, you will be forgiven for finding that a little bit strange that a god has an uncle. But of course, the more you play Dark Souls, the more you kind of understand that the gods aren't really gods in the traditional sense. They're just very powerful beings. And so, having a uncle, Gwyn having an uncle, doesn't really come as much as a surprise. And so, Allfather Lloyd at this point, again, that changes by the time of Dark Souls 3. In the time of Dark Souls 1, seems to be the kind of pope, or at least the leader, kind of head cleric figure at the time in Dark Souls 1. There we go. Okay, am I going to take on this giant crystal lizard? Yeah, okay, why not? So yeah, at that point, it seems like Allfather Lloyd, an actual relative of Gwyn, is kind of the one that's forcing the religion, or not forcing, leading. And that's interesting for a couple of points. First of all, it's weird that a family member is actually pushing the veneration of his own family, but it does make sense. First of all, he would have the knowledge that would be necessary to push the Way of White, and second of all, it is obviously in his own interest to kind of continue the veneration of his nephew, because it will of course directly benefit him as well. If his family's in favour and are the ruling kind of body at that point, then of course it's going to affect Allfather Lloyd as well, who will of course get some kind of benefit from being essentially part of the group that's in charge. I guess it's gone a lot better than I thought it would. Oh, no it's not. Yeah, so Allfather Lloyd is the head at this point. We know that there's a lot of clerics from Thurland, including Rhea and Petrus. There we go. And they push the narrative of the gods, where essentially the Age of Fire needs to continue, and they push the narrative that the Age of Man would be bad for humanity. And by the Age of Man, of course, I mean the Age of Dark. And they do this by encouraging the rite of kindling, and the rite of kindling is essentially, without kind of beating around the bush, is feeding parts of humanity or parts of the Dark Soul, and therefore burning it and weakening it and feeding it to the flame, which obviously is the kind of the source of power for the gods of the day. And by doing that, the Way of White is essentially choosing the side of fire and in the same time weakening the way of dark, but dressing it up as some kind of religious ceremony. They dress up the rite of kindling more than just being burning the dark soul as some kind of religious rite. And all the kind of way of white characters that we meet in Dark Souls 1 have become undead. And of course, another aspect of the way of white is that they hate the undead. The Lloyd's Talisman from Dark Souls 1 says this: in the outside world, the undead are cursed creatures, and Lloyd's cleric knights are widely praised for their undead hunts. So, because it's a sign of the dark side, and it's a kind of danger to the gods, essentially, the Way of White go about hunting the undead. And we can assume that it was probably them that corralled the undead to the north and put them in the undead asylum as well. They're very much anti-undead to the point where they're actually praised for their undead hunts. The Lloyd's Talisman actually itself is a weapon that weakens the undead by kind of reducing their ability to heal on the spot, and reducing their ability to use Estus Flask to heal. So the cleric knights of Lloyd, one can assume, were religious Way of White fanatics who would actually go about hunting undead people. And now we've cleared out this little area, I'm going to go back up to the bonfire so we can start the main path to the Cathedral of Deep. Jump down through here. Yeah, so the Knights of Lloyd are religious Way of White fanatics who believe so strongly in the way of the gods that they'll hunt those who bear the dark sign, which of course is bearing the sign of the dark. And therefore it's a problem for the Way of White when members of the Way of White itself actually become undead themselves. But the Way of White has a very unique way of dealing with this that we see in the game, and this is that they kind of kill two birds with one stone. They want the rite of kindling from Lordran, and at the same time they want rid of these members. So what do? Well, of course, what you do is as with everything with this religion, you pretend it's a religious rite and you send them away. So that's what's happened to Petrus, and that's what happened to Rhea of Thurland, is they're both claiming to be on an undead mission. And so the church essentially, when a member comes undead, they pat them on the back, pack them a sandwich, pack them a bag, and tell them this is God's will, and in this case God being Gwyn, that you do this mission for the church. And so they're sent away, and so it deals with the problem in that they don't have to harm their own kind essentially, but they remove them at the same time. So it seems like a very elegant solution, you have to admit, and they're not the only member that this is the fate of. This is also the fate of Paladin Leroy, who invades us in the catacombs and whose stuff we can find in Gravelord Nito's domain. Paladin Leroy, of course, being a decorated hero, a decorated warrior of the Way of White, and is essentially, again, packed on the back, given a sandwich, and he's put on his way to Lordran to again find the rite of kindling. And of course he fails because, he ends up dead, or crazy because he attacks us in the catacombs. And yeah, the Way of White at this stage are very dogmatic, very passive aggressive in the way they work, and they indoctrinate their members to essentially undertake missions for them. This is why you shouldn't mess around in this graveyard. And essentially to undertake undead missions for them. And Paladin Leroy, Rhea of Thurland, and Petrus are all examples of this. Of course, Petrus is he's clever in a lot of ways, and essentially he turns it to his advantage to get revenge on a royal member of Thurland who he's obviously had a grudge against because he's maybe got a chip in his shoulder for whatever reason that we don't really quite understand. And I'm in a little bit of trouble here. Yeah, I'm dead. Good, classic lazy Sunday lore playstyle there. Okay, good. So now that I'm dead, we'll just carry on with the discussion. And so, in Dark Souls 1 we see that the Way of White is still very much dominant. A lot of people still buy into it. They also have a lot of power in the cities of Thurland, probably other places, places like Astora, given that Astora seems to be a kind of straightforward, kind of knightly place, and also the Firekeeper in Firelink Shrine, Anastasia, is of Astora. And so therefore it's not hard to believe that she herself and her countrymen are believers in the Way of White. And yeah, the Way of White has this kind of sinister vibe to it, where it hunts down the undead, and this is a tradition that we kind of see in Dark Souls 2, in the Huntsman's Copse as well. These undead kind of hunts, of course it's more of a sport rather than a holy thing in Dark Souls 2. I'm just trying to recover my souls here. So yeah, it's a very dominant power in the first one, given that the gods have only just kind of passed at this point, and it's just trying to encourage the way of the old gods, and for humans to sacrifice themselves, both members of the church and otherwise, from other places, to give their lives, to give their humanity, give the Dark Soul to extend the age of the gods. Oh, this thing. Thank you. Yeah, that's what we kind of see in Dark Souls 1. Now, moving on to Dark Souls 2, you might not think that they exist, and for the most part you're right, but there's actually a really interesting kind of aspect to the way it plays out in Dark Souls 2. I've been playing quite a lot of Dark Souls 2 recently, and oh god, I'm getting my maggots. It's very interesting to me the way in which the clerics are kind of not represented in Dark Souls 2. And forgive me, this is why I'm probably playing a bit slow, because I've been playing Dark Souls 2, and of course it's a very different game. But essentially, Vendrick's not a very traditional kind of ruler. He is, yeah, he's very, you could even argue he's possibly a Dark Lord, but even if you don't think he's a Dark Lord, he doesn't follow the traditional kind of dogmas of the kind of original Way of White and things like that. I wasn't paying attention to that. So, let me just grab all these items and I'll read what I've got to say about Vendrick. So, the Priestess set from Dark Souls 2 tells us this: the clerics of Drangleic have retained their status through the ages, but were always at arm's length from the royal family, as if their existence was little more than a formality. So, it looks like, and forgive me if you read this wrong, that Vendrick and his royal family, including Nishandra, had clerics, so had representations of the Way of Light, but these representations were literally done for the sake of it, because every ruler essentially had a clerical body. And for me, this makes sense, because the whole story of Dark Souls 2, both Vendrick and Aldia, in their different ways, want to find a way to not perpetuate the cycle of being cursed and what have you, and then lighting the fire, and then eventually going hollow and being replaced by a new quote-unquote monarch, who's essentially a new heir to the Firelink Shrine. He wants to find a way to permanently escape the cycle. And so whether or not you believe he's the Lord of Dark, it doesn't matter if he's Lord of Dark or not. He essentially doesn't light the fire either way. Whether it's just because he doesn't want to, or he wants something more, or whether because he does believe in the Age of Dark, kind of egged on by Nishandra. Whatever your belief, he doesn't see the traditional ways of things as important. And that includes the Way of White, because in a lot of ways, Aldia and Vendrick are two of my favourite characters in the game. And I've just got hit by an a Lloyd's Talisman there, an Undead Hunter's Charm there, which is quite interesting for the topic that we're talking about. Hopefully I won't actually get hunted here. But yeah, Vendrick and Aldia are extremely interesting because they don't follow the traditional ways of things and the traditional ways of thinking. They're very meta in a lot of ways. They have this very cynical approach to the cycle, and then by that kind of way of thinking, they also have an issue of the way of the gods. And it's probably fair to say that Vendrick probably doesn't believe that the gods were gods, given what he knows about the linking of fires and things like that, and given what his brother knows. And so he essentially, along with the rest of the royal family, sidelines the way of white, and therefore the religion of the old gods. And if you think about it, in Dark Souls 2, do you really hear much mention of the worship of the old gods, except from a couple of characters who mention the gods in general? The answer is no, because obviously in Drangleic, he favoured, and we learned this from the Royal Soldier's Ring in Dark Souls 2, he favoured just strong, simple warriors. He didn't care much for magics or faith or anything like that. And as we saw from the Priestess set, they were kind of relegated to a second-class citizen. That was lucky. Second-class citizen state, because it didn't matter to him, because he wasn't a believer in the old ways and the old gods. He wasn't a believer in the linking of the fire. And again, it's interesting because this kind of feeling, this kind of, I won't say it's atheist, but cynical way of thinking, this realist way, or this, I don't know, different way of thinking where you think more about your personal removal of the curse rather than saving the world or whatever, or becoming a monarch, is interesting because it seems to have translated across into Prince Lothric. And what I mean by that is he seems to have given up on linking the fire, even though that's what he was raised to do, because he sees it as pointless. And of course we know it is, because we play all the games and we know that there's a cycle, so we know that it's pointless. And again, Lothric has this belief that was essentially in Dark Souls 2 perpetuated by Vendrick and more importantly Aldia. So the Way of White gets sidelined in Dark Souls 2 because the Kingdom of Drangleic, the point of Drangleic is very different from all the others. It doesn't follow the traditional beliefs. And that's what kind of makes Dark Souls 2 lore quite interesting, to be honest, is that, oh my goodness. Wow. Classic Lazy Sunday lore gameplay. Oh, good. Oh, kill him with a torch now. Yeah, so that they don't really survive at the time of Dark Souls 2, but that doesn't mean they haven't survived elsewhere. It's just that in the kingdom that we are exploring, Drangleic, which is heavily hinted to, obviously, be where Lordran once was, given that Firelink Shrine is underneath the castle, or hinted to be under the castle. So it's not survived in this kingdom because of the belief system of the rulers, and therefore the Way of White doesn't survive. So I'll move past that. I mean, that's a really interesting point to me, but I could just ramble about that over and over again today. However, in Dark Souls 3, Lothric, to me, is a more kind of traditional place, in that, let me just heal up here. I've said this in a couple of these Lazy Sunday lore videos, and in two of my Royal Blood videos and the Guinevere video, that in a lot of ways the Kingdom of Lothric is an inheritor kingdom of the old ways, the old gods. I won't discuss again, as I do in the Guinevere video and I've done in a number of videos here, why I believe that Guinevere is the Queen of Lothric. It's mainly the Divine Blessing item, and the fact that she leaves, like she did at the first kind of fading of the fire in Lordran. But yeah, I essentially believe that she is the Queen of Lothric. Oh goodness. Oh goodness. Retreat. Major retreat. But yeah, so of course her influence is there, and therefore the kind of worship of the old gods is going to be prevalent in a country where she's the queen, of course. But also just because linking of the fire seems to be the thing, and of course you can never kind of blame the culture if that's always been the kind of religion and the way of doing things. And I think that in this case, Lothric essentially has become the successor kingdom to Lordran. And sorry, I had to just plug in my Xbox controller there, guys. I'm almost get killed by this guy. So yeah, I think we see a more traditional kind of country in Lothric, given that the royal family seems to be obsessed with actually finding a rightful heir that'll be able to link the fire. And it's only because Lothric himself, personally, as a person, egged on by his tutor, of course, who we don't know who it is, rejected the kind of linking of the fire, because he sees it as pointless. But yeah, in general, Lothric is a very traditional country. But we do see evidence of the Way of White in other places as well. The Cathedral of the Deep itself was, in fact, once a Way of White institution. It wasn't always a place that worshipped the deep. Don't believe that. The reason that we know this is because all the kind of clerical armour it was originally clerical armour from the Way of White. The Archdeacon set explicitly mentions the fact that the Archdeacon is the highest rank for the Way of White. So it wasn't an Archdeacon of the Deep. Originally, this was a Way of White institution that was meant to seal away the dangers of the deep, because obviously it's not performing with the ways of the old gods. So we can totally understand why this would want to be sealed away by the Way of White. But in fact, this place, it's like the, I don't know what the saying that I'm looking for, but essentially the prisoners become the prison guards. That's what I'm saying. This religion takes over, the Way of the Deep takes over, the things that they were imprisoning take over their minds, and in fact they do become supporters of Aldrich and his ways of the deep. Aldrich himself, of course, also being a cleric, and I probably like to think that he was a cleric here as well, which is where he started to commune with the deep. So yeah, this is of course a Way of White institution, showing that the Way of White does exist at this point. I'm just going to run away from these guys. But also, we seen that from Dark Souls 1, where Thurland was the main Way of White kind of body, we see that it's changed in this game, and that it seems to now be Karim that seems to be the main kind of institution at this point that kind of supports the Way of White. Oh, good. Yeah, Karim seems to have taken over now. Given that we meet Irina and Aegon, two pilgrims from the Way of White, who essentially kind of play the role that Rhea and her kind of bodyguard did in the first game, and we also have a number of items that suggest that Karim is now the kind of main home for the Way of White by this time. And that's not a huge deal. Of course, it's interesting because Karim was kind of like, oh my goodness, because Karim was at quite a bad place by the time of Dark Souls 1. It was probably at that time still ruled by Earl Arstor, which in one of my other videos of this series we discussed was a very bad man, practicing a very dark arts, and led the country down a pretty bad path, and it spawned people like Lothric, who's not a great fellow either. So yeah, Karim was a bad place in Dark Souls 1, but we can see now it's quite a religious place. So the Lloyd ring sword kind of gives us evidence of this, where it states, "Much time has passed since the worship of Lloyd was common in the Way of White. The clerics of Karim had always strongly asserted that Lloyd was a derivative fraud, and that the Allfather title was self-proclaimed." So we can see a kind of change in the religion here. Much as you see splits in other religions, we have a kind of new school of religion that rejects the Allfather Lloyd aspect of the religion, and they kind of seem as like a false prophet kind of thing. But yeah, apart from anything else, you actually find one of the Lloyd rings in this building as well, the Cathedral of the Deep, so again, another evidence that this is, and it completely is a Way of White building. So this is part of the Way of White, and it therefore seems that Thurland has been replaced by Karim as the head of the Way of White, and we know a number of things about this new kind of body of the Way of White. It could be that it's quite conservative, given that it has nuns. Irina tells us that she was once a nun. Also, that Aegon is commanded to kill her if anything goes wrong. We get this kind of dialogue from her: if you wear Aegon's gauntlets and you kill her, she basically says, "You kill me as you promised," type thing. So yeah, so his duty to her is in part protect her and part execution her if everything goes wrong. So yeah, we can see it's quite an extreme portion of the church, but it is certainly one that's taken over from Thurland. So that's kind of all I've got to say about Way of White, and its kind of evolution. It's kind of changed from Thurland based to Karim based, how Vendrick rejected it essentially, but how it still kind of persists in this day and age, although one of its major institutions, the Cathedral of the Deep, has of course been lost to, in fact, the Deep. And yeah, that's all I'll say about it for now, and we'll move on swiftly to the Q&A. So while I'm resting at the bonfire, I'll just read up my notes. So the first Q&A I've got here is from HardRoad87, and he says, "What do you think of the primordial serpents in Dark Souls 3? What are those weird statues of them in the Grand Archives?" Okay, thanks for that question, Hardroad. You always ask me good questions. And essentially, yeah, this has been a huge kind of point of kind of debate amongst people for quite a while as to what the hell is going on with the primeval serpents. Like, what are the statues? Where are they? So I want to kind of start off by saying I think at this point they are dead. I think when you kill Yuria, she says in the English version, she says, "Kath, I've failed you." So that can imply that he's still alive, or in fact, it kind of does seem to imply. But in the Japanese version, it says something like, "Oh, Kath, your dying wish." So I think that they are dead at this point, and that the legacy of Kath is, of course, the Sable Church, an institution set up kind of in opposite to the Way of White to establish a Dark Lord, or as it's now called, a Lord of Hollows. So yeah, I think they're dead at this point, judging by Kath, and we'll just say that they've got the same lifespan or whatever. Oh, these things are so annoying. So yeah, we'll say that they've got the same lifespan. And so Kath and Framt or whatever, and all of them are dead. So I think at this point they've kind of passed into legend. And I think, except for maybe Yuria and the sisters, no one's seen them in a long time. And that the scholars of the Grand Archives will of course study accounts of them, given that they've got such a vast repository of knowledge. And so the first kind of easy kind of excuse for explaining away how weird the statues are and what's going on with those is you could just say, well, people have forgotten what they look like, and there's Lloyd's sword there, and Lloyd's sword ring there. You just say that people have forgotten what they look like, and it's just a misrepresentation of how they actually used to look, and they've been venerated. I don't actually think that we're supposed to think that they are associated with the angelic faith, given that the angelic faith seems to be kind of the antithesis to the kind of main order, the kind of order of the gods. Of course, that cannot be true. The angels could be the way of dark, and I could be completely... Oh, I forgot about this. Mimic. Silly. Oh, I'm alive. How did that happen? And he doesn't just straight up attack me. Interesting. Alright, so while I equip my little Undead Hunter Charms, let's see what it says. Yeah, there we go. There's another nice bit lore about the Way of White. Allfather Lloyd is long forgotten by the Way of White. His hunts have lived on, and his charms allow one to challenge the undead. There we go. So yeah, he's no longer a part of the Way of White. So we can see an evolution of this religion here. And this little handy tool still lets us take things without any issue. But I'm still going to kill it, so let's just do that. Yeah, so I think the primordial serpents have been long forgotten at this point, much like Allfather Lloyd, and it is very likely that it could just be that this is just a representation of how they look, and that they know that King Sweeper Framt was essential to the old beliefs and a friend of Lord Gwyn, and so they're venerating him like that. I do think that the Grand Archives hold a lot of knowledge. I think that the scholars know a lot of forbidden and forgotten things, and therefore it could very well be that they came across an account of the primordial serpents and it was incorporated into their art. It's definitely not far-fetched at all. And then the only other explanation apart from that is that they are part of the angelic faith, but I don't really like that. I do probably actually prefer the simpler explanation, that it's just not even a misrepresentation, an artistic rendition of these beings, these primordial beings, which they see kind of as important to history, which they are. Especially in Dark Souls 1, they're very, very important. Yeah, that's what I would say about them. I think that essentially it's just that they've been forgotten over time. But yeah, you could say that they're synonymous with the angelic faith. We never still really see the angels. The things that we see in the Ring City DLC, I don't think they're the angels either. Of course, that's not to say that Miyazaki didn't put them in there to mess with us, which is probably what he did. But I think that the angels are something else, given that those angels are essentially parasites. Their real forms are, kind of like cocoons, and they're very strange. They don't seem like the kind of angelic masterminds that I assume the angels could be. So yeah, the primordial serpents definitely could be. And I'll kill Aldrich's little pal here, hopefully. But yeah, I don't see the primordial serpents as the angelic faith though. I don't know why, I just can't buy into it. But that, of course, is totally, I'd understand why you'd think that, given that they've got little kind of angelic wings on their bodies and things like that in the artwork. And yeah, those are to me the two explanations, is that they are the angels. But then the other reason it wouldn't make sense is that the angelic faith is something that is kind of persecuted in Lothric. That's the kind of main reason that I don't buy it, being that they are the angels. It could be that, of course, that the scholars kind of see beyond worldly concerns, and it's just art to them. They don't care, and that they've got some association with the angelic faith, but they don't. They are, they are still part of the main pillars of law, of Lothric. So I don't believe that's the case. I think it's more that this is just a representation of something that the scholars have discovered in the archives. And I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit. Hard Road 87, I know it's a hard one to answer. Those are the two obvious ones to me, and you can obviously, pick either of those. But at that point, guys, I'm going to end it there. I always try and keep these around half an hour. I hope you've enjoyed this return to Lazy Sunday Lore. I know I have. As for what's coming next with the channel, I'm going to finish off part 2 of my Seath the Scaleless video in the next couple of weeks. It's obviously a bigger part than the first one because it's covering 2 games. And then I'm going to obviously continue doing Lazy Sunday Lore. I've got a couple of other things for Dark Souls on my mind, but I'm not sure if I'll get to them before Sekiro, but I'll keep you updated on my community tab. But getting on to Sekiro, I'm of course going to be covering that when it comes out, doing some lore videos for that, and talking about the lore in that game. But I'll never stop talking about Dark Souls. Doesn't mean my channel's ever going to move away from it. It just means that there'll be a peak of interest in Sekiro for me, because I've just played the game for the first time. But thanks, guys, for watching this, the weekly lore video, and I hope you have a nice weekend. Thanks, guys.